Alright, so I'm finally doing a video on my TRON80 conversion. I showed this on my Instagram probably beginning of the year, early January or so. Took on a vacation with me, got a lot of cool footage, and yeah, this is probably one of my most favorite conversions that I've been flying. I've been obviously converted with the DJI O3 air unit, which I stripped down to make it naked, make it lighter. But yeah, got a lot of questions about this one. Sorry I haven't had a lot of time to make a video about this one. I wanted to, well, someone pointed out to me that I have the old version of this that isn't sold anymore. So making a video about this specific conversion without talking about what the differences are between this and the updated V2 version, which is here, wouldn't make much sense, so I put this video off for a couple of months, waiting for this to show up, and now I'm ready to go ahead and do that. So this case here is actually not from T-Motor. This is from the Happy Model baseline. So if you're wondering where you can get this case, that's where that case comes from. But it fits this perfectly. It just kind of slides around a little bit here, and vertically it fits in really nice. I'll show you what I did for my conversion, and then I'll explain what the differences are for the new version, because this frame is a little bit different, as well as I'll get into that here in a moment here. Anyway, so this version has been around for a while. This is a pretty old model, at least a couple of years, I think, and they've updated the ducts with the prop guards. They're made of a different kind of plastic. I think the old one is a little bit more flexible, and the new one's a little bit more stiff. I've heard that this new one's a little bit more brittle and breaks a little bit easier. Also, the frame's a little bit different, so you can see here the screws go into the plastic duct and not on the carbon part here for two of the screws, and then two screws have the carbon for the motor here. So on the new version, they have 4 screws going into all this, so the carbon part's expanded for this frame. Also, there's no USB-C port here on this flight controller on the new version compared to the old version, and I actually have this little plug here to keep water out. This is just something I pulled from an iFlight flight controller, so USB-C port, that's another difference here. The motors on here are the same. They're 1103, 8000 kV. They still have the same extended stem, as you can see right there, that kind of pushes the prop down a little bit. Not the greatest thing for vibrations, but I have a interesting solution for keeping vibrations out of the camera. I'll explain that here shortly. But yeah, they made a few changes with the frame. The flight controller is a little bit different. These are the same motors with the same smaller screws. So these are like M1.8 screws, which are kind of hard to find. So some people said, oh, well, you can just buy the frame and different motors, and that's not true. You can't do that because you have to come up with, you have to come up with a way to put drill these holes out to make them M2 screws for a standard motor. So otherwise you have to get these T-motor motors with that extended stem. And if you use a regular motor, the prop is going to sit up higher. So a lot of issues with this one if you're trying to do a conversion. So this one here was the Vista version and I obviously took the Vista air unit out of here and put the O3 air unit in here. I am using the stock antenna, but I stripped it down. So you can see it's just got that plastic piece. The cap is missing. I pulled that off, as well as the tube, and that sheds off a fair amount of weight. I'll put up the screenshots here of the weight difference with the plastic cap on and off. I haven't noticed any difference in terms of range loss. I don't really fly this that far away anyway. There's no GPS return to home on this one anyway. The only thing is that because the antenna is oriented horizontally like this, if you're away, as you're flying away from yourself, and say you're flying from here and you're flying away, when you turn around, then the antenna is going to be pointing away from you. with the quad blocking reception. So not the best antenna setup here. If you want to fly far away, I would recommend coming up with something different, but then you won't be able to keep it flat like this and put it into a nice little case like I did here. So, little things I wanted to do, I made some trade-offs for that particular purpose. And what I did was, because it's not very secure, it's just held on with some dental floss onto the frame or the prop guard. And then I used some tape to hold that down so the dental floss wouldn't slide around. And it does move around a little bit. You have to manage your cable or wires for the antennas pretty carefully. I put a piece of foam here as a landing pad. The O3 air unit fits really nicely into this frame here. So these holes were specifically for the Vista air unit, and those were also M1.8 screws, kind of coincidentally, and that fits perfectly into the same screw holes that were in the O3 air unit. And as you can see, I stripped down the O3 air unit so that pretty much everything is out of there, including the micro SD card slot. I removed that as well just to save the weight, but that meant that I would have to use a right angle adapter to get to the USB-C port. I still can't access that with a right angle adapter, and then I can take the files off of the internal, like 22 gigabytes of storage, which is fine because I just do a few flights and then I take the files off pretty much right away. And stripping the O3 ear unit down is pretty difficult because there's a lot of these like little pieces of glue that are on certain spots holding on the ribbon cables, and they're right next to some like capacitors or resistors components that are on the PCB. And if you aren't really careful, if you just rip it off, those little parts will come off too. So yeah, I'm not sure if there's a video out there. There probably is if you search on YouTube on how to strip it down, but it's not easy and it's time consuming. For this whole project here, I don't recommend it if you're a beginner, even if you've been doing builds for a while. This one is going to be pretty tough. It took me probably a good month on and off just working on it, just to get just everything exactly the way I wanted it to. Basically there's the two boards here are separated by a ribbon cable, and then I used a M1.8 screw which I found on Amazon, goes through there, and then there's a nut right over there that holds everything together and holds it in place. I've actually crashed this a few times, and I think I've lost one of the nuts that were over there in the front, but the screw hasn't fallen out yet. It's still, I can push it back in. This little piece of foam is kind of holding it in place, but that's the only one that I've lost. And I guess the plug for the flight controller that went to the Vista is basically the same wire setup as the one that goes to the O3 air unit, but I just found another cable that's a little bit shorter. You can see I'm running it right there, and it goes into the O3 air unit right over there. It's kind of hard to see, it's right there, and it's just that same plug, and that plugs right into the flight controller. Now the new one, it does have that same plug. So the new flight controller is pretty similar, and I think it has that same plug, but it's in a different location. It's there it is right there with that one, or it's that one over there. I'm not 100% sure because I'm not planning to take this one apart. You may need to use the solder pads on this flight controller. You'll have to probably contact T-Motor on getting a wiring diagram for this flight controller because I couldn't find it on their website. So contact the T-Motor support site and see if you can get a wiring diagram, because you'll probably have to do it probably doesn't have the same plug. You'll have to do a direct solder to the flight controller for the wiring for the O3 air unit. But you can see they moved the USB-C cable or the USB-C port out of there. It's not there anymore, and they have a separate micro USB port here on the side, and they have a plug here with some wires that go to the, looks like it gets routed around here, and then looks like it plugs in over there for the flight controller access. So yeah, it's totally different flight controller. I believe this one will go to 4S, whereas the old one will do 2 to 3S only. So there's a lot of differences there. Motors are going to be the same. I think the onboard ESCs are the same amperage, so no real differences there. But if you are considering doing this conversion, get the analog version here, so you're not wasting a lot of money on the DJI Vista. The analog version, you just have to basically take off this plate here and these screws, and then the video transmitter receiver is in that little TPU port that's right in the middle there. That'll come out, and then you'll have this open area here for the O3 ear unit once you've turned that, obviously stripped it down and made it naked. But here is what the two bottoms of the frames look like side by side. You can see the same cutout here in that spot. This here was for the Vista's USB-C port, if you had the Vista version. So that's still there. So I think that's pretty much the same. I believe the frame or the prop guards hasn't changed. So it looks like that's the same, just the material feels a little bit different in terms of what they're using. Also note that I am using some different props. Instead of the gem fans, I went with these 4-bladed HQ props. Seems to have pretty good efficiency. I think I might try the 3-bladed ones for maybe a little bit more efficiency. I am flying this with a pretty small battery, this 3S 300 milliamp hour, just to keep the weight down. And I get a solid 3 minutes of flight time on this setup here. So obviously, once you take out the bottom plate and the video transmitter, you want to get rid of the camera and this cage. So you're going to pop off these two screws here and these two screws here. There's a nut that's in the carbon for this mounting point here, and then this whole cage will come off, and you'll be able to remove the camera, and then you won't need this because you don't want to use something like this where it's actually the camera is on this prop guard. It's going to be vibrating a lot, which is why my mount here is this little TPU part that I designed. There's a screw, M2 screw that goes through that part, goes through that nut, and comes out the bottom side. Very hard to see here. It's on the other side of this carbon, and you can see there. Yeah, it's not going to be. You can't really see it that well, but there is the second part of this TPU part that goes underneath, like so, and this holds the camera in pretty well. It is allowed to move, and I did that so that you would have vibration isolation. I worked on this part for a while, different lengths, keeping the camera further in, further out, different thicknesses of this TPU. It took a while to get it dialed in where you wouldn't be getting a ton of jello. Now, obviously, this is super light. I'll give you the weight here in a second. And if you're in windy conditions, this gets pushed around a lot. So I wouldn't recommend flying this in wind. It's mainly meant for like a little bit of outdoor flying with, fairly light winds or no winds, or mainly indoors. But yeah, if you do fly this in a lot of wind, and if it's struggling, it will send a lot of vibrations to the camera, and you will see jello, just because there's only so much that this can do in terms of eliminating that vibration. The PID tune on here is, I think it's pretty much stock. I don't think I changed it. So it's a stock PID tune that came with it. I think Team Motor might have updated it for their newer version, because this is an old PID tune on here. The one I have on, I didn't actually update the Betaflight version. I think it's like really old, like 4.2 or something like that. So basically, they're pretty close to stock PIDs. If you're wondering, I didn't really do any tuning, and there's definitely, you can hear definitely some vibrations, but they don't come through to the camera unless it's really windy. And that's pretty much it. I have an ND, obviously, the ND filter on here. Obviously you can remove the case here and then just get the camera in there by itself if you want to reduce the weight some more, but then you have to find a way to mount it, and then you'll be adding more TPU parts, more plastic parts to mount the camera. So I figured I just might as well use the screw holes that are on the existing camera housing and just deal with the extra weight, because if you take off the weight of the camera housing, you're gonna have to add more weight to find a different way to mount it. I figured that's kind of pointless, so went with this way here. And you can see, that it just floats, doesn't touch the prop guards at all, but it is allowed to move around a little bit. And this particular model is prone to a lot of vibrations because of the longer stem from the motor here, and then this is pretty flimsy prop guard setup. But I think this camera mount here does the job. I get pretty good footage. I mean, I'm pretty sure you're looking at it here. I'll put some more examples down in the video description. But yeah, the only options in terms of like getting this is to convert the analog version of this V2, as I mentioned, and all the steps involved. And yeah, if you are interested in doing this conversion, I'm gonna get in contact with me. I'm gonna ask you some questions to see if you have the knowledge to be able to do it or not, because it's not going to be easy. And these TPU parts, I'll only make it available to people that I feel are qualified to do this conversion, because this is super hard. But people ask me to at least explain a little bit about how to do it. And hopefully that's enough information. Hopefully that's enough information for those of you that have enough knowledge on how to strip things down, make things lighter, convert things. You should have a pretty good baseline from this video on how to do it yourself if you have the TPU part here. And if you are totally clueless, then I don't recommend you do this one, because it's probably best to wait for some manufacturer to come up with something similar here that is going to be pre-made, because this is a pretty tough conversion, especially the stripping down of the O3 air unit. All right, so this is how much this guy weighs. No battery, 69.9 grams, and then with my 300 milliamp hour, 3S, 99 grams all up weight. Anyway, it's going to cover for this video. As I said, contact me if you're really, really desperate on making this conversion, and we'll work out a way of getting the special parts here to get the camera mounted properly for this model. But otherwise, I would wait around, and hopefully there'll be something like this coming out from maybe T-Motor or someone else. Maybe one of these manufacturers will pick up this idea and make something like this, because if you just get like one of these sort of 75 millimeter whoops and put an naked O3 air unit in there, you can get this whole thing under 100 grams, and that's super light and pretty useful for specific situations for some people that can't fly. Things that are over 100 grams, for example. I think like Japan is one of those areas. So anyway, that's good for this video. Talk to you guys in the next one.